In this video, I want to talk about AP Psychology briefly and introduce the units as well as the exam format. I took the exam in May of 2022, so I'll be talking about this course after finishing the AP English videos. Out of the few AP courses that I've done, I can say that AP Psychology is definitely one of the easiest so far because it requires mostly memorization and a basic understanding of vocabulary definitions. There aren't any essays or long, hard free response questions. The most important skill would be simply applying those definitions to real life scenarios, and that takes up all of the free response section. That's the only thing you'll do in the free response. And as you can see here, you don't need a prerequisite, and this is kind of equal to a one semester introductory college course. So in terms of content, it's not too difficult. As with most other AP courses, AP Psychology is divided into units, and each unit has a different weighting on the exam. So some units will be tested more often and some are a little less important. So as you can see here, Unit 1 is Scientific Foundations of Psychology, and it weights about 10 to 14%. Biological Basis of Behavior, 8 to 10%. Sensation and Perception, 6 to 8%. Learning, 7 to 9%. Cognitive Psychology, 13 to 17%. Developmental Psychology, 7 to 9%. Motivation, Emotion, and Personality, 11 to 15%. Clinical Psychology, 12 to 16%, and Social Psychology, 8 to 10%. So just at a glance, the biggest units in terms of content are probably units 1, 5, 7, and 8. So these are definitely where you want to focus the most when you're studying for the exam. Personally, I took about 1.5 months to seriously prepare for the exam, after having already read some materials for 2 months before that. So overall, I think this exam takes way less time to prepare for than AP English Language because it's very straightforward and there aren't any complicated skills or questions involved. And I think the best thing is that you don't have to write an essay for this exam, so that saves you a lot of time practicing. And in terms of content, you can find basically everything you need to know on AP Classroom. They have AP Daily videos that are basically video lessons. And if you want a textbook source, lots of people have recommended using Myers Psychology. This textbook has a lot of versions, so it's probably better to get an up-to-date version as recent as possible, or one that is made specifically for the AP course. For those who might be worried about the exam and overall preparation process, I think you'll be fine as long as you organize your work and divide it into reasonable time periods to complete. The exam is in May, so the latest you should start studying is probably around December or January, and that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be doing video lessons or reading the textbook by then, but you should at least prep some introductory materials by then. And if you're too busy or you don't feel the need to brush up on background knowledge and you want to dive right into the course, then leave yourself at least 3 months. So you should be doing lessons and reading texts by February. These lessons can of course include watching AP Daily videos as well as reading the textbook, but you can also find many other sources online or even outlines of the most tested topics. AP Psychology is a pretty popular exam and lots of people take it, so there's lots of sources that you can find. You should aim to complete the course learning by March or early April at the latest, because that leaves you about a full month to study. Again, this is only if you really don't have time to start earlier. I think the earlier you start, the better, as you have more time to figure out areas that you don't understand. But if you're short on time, start compiling your notes by April, and also do some past exam questions on College Board. For reference, I typed nearly 30 pages of notes on Google Docs, and I printed it out during spring break, which was when I began reviewing. From then on, I rarely used my textbook and only returned to AP videos when I needed clarification. I went over my package every day and then practiced a set of exam questions whenever I had time. Make sure all the key ideas of the course are drilled into your brain so you know exactly where they are if you're asked to explain on the test. Now, and also the reason why I think making your own notes and then reviewing them is helpful is because you get to summarize a lot of topics. The AP psychology textbook is really long, so not everything in there is going to be on the exam, and that's why I think it's better to take down important and key ideas just for yourself when you need to review. Now I want to quickly go over each unit and what difficulties you might run into. This is Unit 1's rubric at a glance. It has quite a bit of weighting on the actual exam, so 10 to 14%. When I studied this unit, the hardest part for me was memorizing each branch of psychology and what they stood for. There are also a couple big names like Freud and Carl Rogers that you need to know, and they each belong in a different school of psychology. I didn't study this unit specifically until my review period 1 month before the exam. That was when I made a really big chart with all of that information in it. I copied that from my textbook, and then I categorized different terms and names into the columns. Doing that helped me clear up misunderstandings, and I organized the chart into different schools of psychology, and under each category I put relevant psychologists' names, big discoveries, and central ideas, maybe also experiments if there are any. So yeah, just imagine it as a normal Google Doc table that you could insert, and then you would put, for example, school, and then it would be divided into behaviorism and structuralism, and then for each one you can take some notes. For Unit 2, which weighs less than Unit 1, I had the most trouble with memorization again. And this time it was about parts of the brain and endocrine system. There are a lot of names, and each part has a specific function that impacts how humans behave. Another big idea of this unit is drugs and medication. There are types of drugs like stimulants or depressants that you need to remember. There's also the human sleep cycle, like REM sleep. For these big topics, it's also best to just make tables and charts for classification. You might have noticed by now that you don't always need a lot of details for charts. The exam rarely asks you very detailed questions. All you need is a general idea of topics, and you don't need to worry about remembering every single piece of information you learned, as long as you have the key idea. Unit 3 is not weighed very much either, and the topics here aren't tested very often. Just make sure you know the 5 senses and sensory disorders. You might also want to write down auditory and visual systems and their parts and functions, such as rods and cones. Unit 4 is about learning. The major topics here include conditioning, so make sure you're familiar with terms like CS, CR, UCR, and UCS. There are also terms like acquisition, extinction, and habituation that are important. Another topic you need to know are positive versus negative reinforcements or punishments, as well as fixed or variable ratios/intervals. Unit 5 is a big unit that weighs a lot on the exam. The unit is called Cognitive Psychology and centers around memory, intelligence, and language. You will need to know how humans encode, store, and retrieve memories, how language develops in children, and how individuals can hold biases in their thinking. I think it's good to know the thinking biases well, and this can also be done by making a table, as well as the process of how memory is retrieved, which is a step-by-step series, so you can make it like a list. Unit 6 is Developmental Psychology. Most of it will be about how children develop into adults in different aspects. The biggest topics are parenting styles, attachment types, and theories of cognitive development. There are also different conflicts humans face at different ages, such as identity versus role confusion. While this unit doesn't weigh the most, I think it'd be good to know all the levels of development and the different theories as well, because you will definitely come across some of them on the exam. Unit 7, which weighs much more, is about motivation, emotion, and personality. The most important thing is to know all the theories in this unit, as well as the different types of personality tests. Freud's 5 stages and the unconscious are also tested quite a lot, so you need to know them well. Unit 8, Clinical Psychology, is about all types of disorders, ranging from neurodevelopmental and schizophrenic to substance abuse and eating disorders. The AP Daily video lessons will go through all of the disorders that you need to know and that will be tested. For this unit, I once again made a big chart that categorized disorders. Make sure to also include treatment methods as well, because that's often on the test. The final unit, Unit 9, is Social Psychology. There are a few things you should know very well for this one. First, you definitely have to know what fundamental attribution error is, because I've seen it in every set of questions that I've done. That comes up a lot for sure. Second, know the difference between conformity, compliance, and obedience, because the difference between them will be tested. And just like that one, you will also have to know the difference between bias, prejudice, and discrimination. Once you break it all down, you'll hopefully realize that while it does seem like a lot at first, it gets better after you categorize. Mind maps, flowcharts, or tables and graphs all work well for organizing this type of information that you encounter in the course. Now that we've gone over the units, here's the exam format. The exam is around 2 hours long and only has 2 sections. The good news is that this exam doesn't require you to write an essay, which saves a lot of time in both preparation and the actual exam. The first part is a multiple choice, which is 70 minutes and 100 questions. It's 67% of your overall score. You get approximately 1.5 minutes on each question, but that's plenty of time if you know your stuff. Most questions are somewhat straightforward and won't require that much to do. The key is to do all the questions you know first and go back to the ones you're unsure of later. The second section, which is the free response, is 50 minutes long and makes up 33% of your overall score. There's 2 questions in the free response, but each is divided into many parts, so it's basically like answering many questions, but they're all small questions. Most AP Psychology free response questions want you to answer in simple wording and sentences. All you have to do is apply a term to a real-life scenario, and I'll show you some examples. On the left are 2 examples of multiple choice questions you might see on the exam. If you read them closely, you might find that they are really just simple questions that ask you to match the definition of a word to the actual word. For example, in question 27, you have to match one of the following 5 words to the definition: the tendency to develop a positive attitude toward a product that has been advertised repeatedly in the media. The same thing goes for 28. You have to find one of the 5 words and match it to the instance where your retinal image gets smaller, but you do not perceive them to be shrinking. On the right is an example from the 2021 free response section. I would personally spend much more time practicing for the free response, seeing as how most multiple choice questions are simple and just involve simple definitions. As you can see in this question will give you a scenario, and in this case it's a student completing an assignment. You then have to understand all the terms listed there in bullet points and apply each of them to the situation. The answer can be short, just 1 or 2 sentences for each bullet point, but it has to clearly explain how divergent thinking, for example, or efferent neurons could affect how Malia does her assignment. This video is just an introduction to the course and exam, so there will be more practice with real questions later on. But when you're practicing for the free response, you have to remember to connect the term back to the scenario eventually. Lastly, you might want to see the score distribution before deciding whether or not to take the AP Psychology exam. Last year, 17% of people got a 5 on the exam, and nearly 60% of students got a 3 or above. This makes AP Psychology one of the easiest exams under history and social science APs, and it's an average difficulty course overall. If you haven't made up your mind yet, there's still a lot of time to decide. You might want to start reading some materials and looking over questions already to see if this course is right for you.